mode before.
So it says preview, starting live.
Yeah, I think it has to go through like there. I see it. It's turning.
Okay, I think we did it, right? I think we did it, right? Oh, no, I'm going to never do it. All right, I'm going to hang up. Good evening. Welcome. Welcome to our viewers around the world. I'm Robert Durso, one of the senior directors and one of the co-founders of the Golandsky Institute. I'm delighted to be spending the next 45 minutes with you in this streaming session. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank the following individuals who helped to make this session possible. Thank you to Edna Golansky, founder and artistic director of the Golandsky Institute, for providing invaluable consultation on the material presented tonight. To my colleagues and co-founders, Mary Moran and John Bloomfield, and to David Friedman and Fix Music for their sponsorship and support. Also to Amy Vida, who helped create and publicize this event. Last but certainly not least is Dorothy Taubman, to whom we are all eternally grateful. At the Golandsky Institute, we are thrilled that tonight was received so enthusiastically. We have more than 550 people registered to be on this session, and I've received many questions for consideration. I reviewed each of your questions and selected those that best address the most common issues many of you deal with in practicing and performing. Finally, it goes without saying, we are living in challenging and unsettling times. Please be well and stay safe. Once again, we thank you for spending time with us and for your interest in the Taubman approach. So, one of the first questions that came in was a question from a Matt who said, what process do you personally take when starting a new piece? And I thought it was a very, very good question and a good opportunity to kind of very quickly sum up a few points about how the work is organized a little bit and how that organization can help you in your practicing. So I did give you a handout. And it's available also on the live stream in the comments part of it. And this is very, very not a step-by-step thing here, but just a way to kind of gather some of the tools that we'll be using tonight, because there'll be people on the call that this will be their first exposure to the Taubman work. There are some very seasoned people. So I thought we could all kind of get organized this way. So the Taubman approach, one of the questions many people ask is what produces tension, limitations, discomfort, and pain? So the first thing that we have to deal with is alignment. We as a body have to align to the instrument in a certain way, and then the playing unit, which is the finger, hand, and forearm, has to align to the keyboard in a certain way. And we have a lot of detailed information on our website to the specifics of that, but some very general points. You want the bottom of the elbow, the forearm, to be level or slightly higher with the white keys. When people sit too low, there are problems. When people sit too high, there are problems. So sitting level and adjusting the seat to accommodate that is very important. Adjusting how far you sit. You need to sit in a comfortable way where you're not reaching out for the piano, nor are you crowded. One of the most important aspects of alignment is that things don't collapse. If you go into a key and the first thing that happens is the wrist falls, you lose all support for the playing. If you lose support for the playing, you can't do the second job, which is to move to another key. Let's talk about curling and straightening. We're taught sometimes as children to hold an apple or hold a ball, and that curls the fingers. You can try it right now quickly. If you curl the fingers and move them, you have a certain experience. If you let the fingers out and you move them, you have another experience. So the natural curve is what we have when we do nothing and put our hand by the side and bring it up and study it. The curling of the last flange is what creates an enormous amount of tension. Twisting. When the finger, hand, and forearm are misaligned from each other in this direction or even the other direction, that produces tension. Stretching. When we try to reach distances far greater than the spaces of our fingers. Forcing is another aspect. Hitting very hard to the bottom. Remember in physics, every action has a reaction equal and opposite. So when we hit into the keyboard is going to be hitting back at us. And initiating motions from inappropriate parts of the body. The finger, hand, and forearm are our primary unit, and the forearm initiates motions across the instrument. If other parts of the body do that kind of job, for instance the upper arm, there are problems. Those are large muscles which will get taxed in speed. Moving on, I'm sure you can take a look and see if you feel any of those things in your playing. How do we identify problems in our playing? These are just some tips to understand what do we actually have to practice. We have to practice if we're missing notes, if we're unable to play in a tempo you desire, if your playing sounds uneven and there are unwanted hesitations, not being able to articulate clearly, not getting the sound or phrasing you want, unwanted accents, unwanted ghost tones, tones that sound but they have no quality to them, unable to play in the tempo you desire, feelings of insecurity or confusion, an experience of tension, of limitation, of discomfort and or pain. So, if we organize the work in a very general way, it's very difficult because it's a framework, it's not a step-by-step approach. The things that we have to deal with as pianists are alignment. We have to deal with how we line up to the piano and then how our body lines up to itself. And very quickly, what that means is if we have the natural shape of the fingers, we have a middle knuckle here. When the fingers are straightened, we lose that middle knuckle. That's an important support. The main knuckle is important, that it not be too high and it not be collapsed down. The wrist is a joiner. The wrist joins the hand to the forearm, and so if it's collapsed down or collapsed up, we have no connection of those parts. The whole point is to connect the parts of the body, the finger, the hand, and the forearm, and how it connects into the rest of the body. The forearm is connected at the elbow, so if the elbow is falling in or the elbow is held out, you don't have the proper alignment. And the shoulder holds all of that, the upper arm. If the shoulder is up, you have constriction. If you relax the shoulder down, you also have problems. So we work a lot, and you saw in the video that I sent how we train people to understand how to line up properly. Then we move, once somebody's lined up well, that takes care of half of the battle, which is how to put a key down. We have to begin to move left and right. This is how we play. So we begin to understand that the finger, hand, and arm have specific movements. And those movements include rotation, in and out, walking hand and arm, and forearm, shaping, and rebound. We need to realize that a piano technique is not one thing. So we have to find ways to combine these components. A lot of practicing is understanding how the components combine together. And these components have proportions. The proportions of the components to themselves and to others. Very often this work is just known as just rotation, big rotational movements. And actually we do make the rotation slightly larger when we teach it, but it's actually the only element that we make larger than it actually exists in playing, for the purpose of lining someone up, for feeling connected, for freeing the forearm to move well across the instrument. There are kinesthetic awarenesses, how to coach somebody on the proper feelings. How does it feel to move in a free way and not a relaxed way? There is a whole range of things, and they'll come up tonight in the passages, about where we play on the instrument. Sometimes we can be lined up very well, we can move very well, but we can be on the completely wrong part of the keyboard, and therefore the passage will fail. And then, once the core elements are there, if a passage fails, it could be other things. It could be a bad fingering, it could be not dealing with the leap well, something in the rebound or the staccato, the interdependence, how we group things, or even enslavement to notation. All of these are very, very rich and deep topics, but for tonight's presentation I just wanted to give you an idea of what we bring to this, what Mrs. Taubman discovered, and how we apply it to passages. So I want to go directly to some passages that you wrote in. So these are interesting because they are the questions that you had. They're not questions that we made up. So the first question comes from a Catherine, and she says, I would be very grateful if you could briefly cover measure 5 in Ravel's Ondine. So there's a packet of examples. I hope that you're able to download them and you can follow along. You can also watch the live stream again, so don't be so nervous to get every detail I talk about. She goes on to write, I am struggling to make the left hand second quaver C-sharp sound. Of course, I want it to be softer than the previous left hand D-sharp. Though because I have just played the C-sharp pianissimo with the right hand, the left one doesn't sound. And when it does, it is too loud. So this was very interesting. So if we look at this passage, we begin to see that measure 5, which is marked, that you have certain skills needed for the upper part. So it's a very interesting writing because you have denser sonorities alternating with lighter sonorities or single notes. Our bodies don't always accomplish those two things well immediately. What we sometimes have to sense is the walking hand and arm, which is the vertical walking hand and arm. The hand and the forearm give a little bit of support to the finger, and then on the chord, and then it lifts slightly and comes down on the single note. So what the purpose here is that it brings support to both things. It's very easy to have support on the chord, but maybe no arm support on the single note, or vice versa. The chord actually has more weight needed because you have 3 notes. Maybe the arm doesn't give the fingers what they need. So we do a process here where we just sense down, 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 down. It's very, very small, and you can sense that it gives an equal support. You don't feel like there are strong and weak fingers, which is really, really amazing. So I would say that that skill has to be solved first. Of course, there's rotation. The forearm is coming from the right to play to the left, straight down, to the right, left, left. So left, right, left, left. Even though I'm straight down on the chord, I'm coming from the right in the preparatory motion to play down. To the left to play down. So it's interesting because it's a good idea to determine if there's a problem in one hand or another, or if the problem lies in the putting of hands together, which is our category of interdependence. So let's say that we have now solved this passage. We have to see, why is there still a problem? One of the first things that I noticed was that the C sharp is actually playing as a repeated note. So if you look at the figure and you add the other hand, this C sharp has just played the chord, and now it has to play the melodic note C sharp. So I'm pretty sure that's why there's so much difficulty in controlling the sound. So how do we overcome that? When we play the second chord, we release the thumb off of it through the rotation. The rotation gets rid of that the thumb, on that chord, enabling me to play the second finger on the C sharp. So it's a repeated note. So you can't play a repeated note unless the first one releases. So can you see that the success here has a lot to do with timing the release of the key? Let's move on. Next question was from David. He said, there are two general rules about rotation that sometimes seem to be somewhat in conflict. Number one, begin a passage with a single, not double rotation. And number two, continuing your rotation through rests. It's a very good question. So the best way to answer this is to equate it to tennis or batting. You always need a preparatory motion in order to swing, to hit the ball. And it really operates the same way here. So if we go to that example right in measure 31, if you start straight down, there's no momentum to go to the next note. So you're starting with a kind of single rotation opposite to the direction of the second note. So that's what happens there. There's a preparatory motion which sends it here. Now, that preparatory motion becomes so small that it's not visible. So after that's happened, we now have, in measure 32, an eighth note and two rests. So what happens rotationally over those rests? It actually functions by the normal rules of single note rotation. So from that downbeat, I'm rolling over like a crossover, and I'm playing to the right on the downbeat of 33, and it's a double rotation to the downbeat of 34. Now, what's very interesting about that seems very mechanical. But like I said, we always work in combinations of motion. So when you shape it, there's a kind of overshape there. Which means when we talk about shaping, we're talking about the landing height of the finger, hand, and forearm. And we can land at various heights. A very good example of that is something like B major. As soon as I go a little bit forward to the fourth finger, my finger, hand, and arm is getting a little bit higher. When you put those different heights next to each other, they start to form curvilinear shapes across the instrument. So that's what's happening here. And that's what smooths out some of the more angular movements like rotation. Let's move on. This question comes from Juan. He wrote, how can I trill fast? What fingering would you use in this passage? This is the Beethoven Waldstein Sonata, first movement. And I thought it was a very good question because in terms of the content required for a trill, it's not that complicated. But there are many aspects of doing it correctly that are necessary to make it be a successful fast trill. So the point here is, if we go to measure 73 that he marked here, if you have the trill with 2 and 1, which is, I think, is the best fingering for this trill. Also, it helps us get out because when we get to the Nachtschlag, I don't think you would want to do something else other than go to the 3rd finger and then to the octave. So the 2-1 is a good fingering. But way beyond fingering, let's look at all that one can be aware of here. First of all, the passage is up here. If I'm taught to play the piano and told never to move my body, I'm already uncomfortable. Everything feels constricted, I feel twisted. It's not going to be a very good situation trying to go fast on top of all of that. So, the main thing here that's happening is that the torso is shifting a little bit over to the right. And you'll find you don't need to go very far in order for this to feel very different and very comfortable. So you can always start from where am I in the center and how far over do I really need to go. You don't need to go all the way over. You should never feel like you're tipping over. It's just a subtle movement over to the right. The other thing to realize is that this particular trill, single notes, are all single rotations. So when I play with the forearm going to the left, it gives me the motion to the right. There's a slight follow through after the note's played, so I play and immediately follow through, giving me the motion back. That's what the trill is, the mechanics of the trill. There are other aspects of this trill. So if you put it with the top voice, we found that when we went very fast, we actually did 1 per note in the upper part. So the bottom part are also 16th notes. So there's also the coordination of the 2 hands in terms of rotation. They're playing away from each other and then towards each other. So if that gets confused, the most important thing in trills is that the forearm is not confused. It's like walking. You can't be on the left foot and sort of on the right. You have to be either your body's on the left side or it's on the right side. It feels very much in the arm very organized. One of the things I think in trills like this that can be helpful is paying attention to the fingers that are not playing. Because very often what happens are people relax those fingers. And the more that those non-playing fingers are not part of the whole, the harder that trill will become and the more labored it will become. So it's interesting, when I go to the thumb side, all of those fingers inside my body are in the direction of the thumb. And then the thumb, when I play the second finger, is in the direction of the second finger. It's important to realize that whenever we're discussing all of these things become so microscopic, which is why I find it so amazing that Mrs. Taubman found all of these things, because they're barely visible to the eye, but you really can feel the difference. If you play this passage and the forearm does not slightly continue over the note, beyond the note, it also will stop speed. So getting trills that are stuck can very often be that the arm did not complete its second single rotation. Realizing that as it swings to the left, it's a natural experience to swing back to the right. So in a way, one direction is giving us the other direction. So it's interesting to realize also that you could have a failure here by thinking always that everything has to be connected and legato. When we come to this trip, the Nachschlag, if you try to connect that D sharp to the octave, I don't think anybody will make it well. So what happens there is a tiny rebound. We have rebounds in the air, in one would say a staccato, but that are inaudible, and you can hardly even feel them. They're so small. But we can see if I play that D sharp and let go, I can have it send me to this octave. If I connect it, I can't get to the octave. Okay. Let's move on. Let's move on to the Mozart. This is from Dean. My left hand has difficulties playing the G, fourth finger, at the end of the first bar to the F sharp, fifth finger at speed. I tried moving my hand in after playing the fourth finger, but it felt rushed due to the speed of the passage. I found that this was really interesting because this person is actually on the right track, very much on the right track. There was also another question from Tajin, which is, are there any ways to strengthen the fourth and fifth fingers? So I want to put those two questions together because this will explain it. So if we look at the measure 20 there, what Dean was saying was he tried to move in after the fourth finger. Well, if you're here and you're moving to this F sharp, first of all, the F sharp is a black key, it's further in and it's higher. And the fifth finger is short. So that is a classic twist. The way we understand how to make it feel really good is just by using the in and out. So we start here, and we really have to immediately start to move in. So we start to move in on the second finger, the third, the fourth, and the fifth. That motion in of my finger, hand, and forearm gives enormous power to the 4 and the 5. So that answers also Tijan's question, which, how do we strengthen the fingers? I always found it fascinating that Mrs. Taubman said one of her first insights was the prodigy, that young people could play this instrument extremely well without years of muscular development. So how were their fourth and fifth fingers strengthened when they haven't had any years of exercising? It's not about exercising, and this was her big discovery, which really created a kind of revolution, because the establishment has said that you need to strengthen the fingers. Well, actually she realized that the finger was strong enough when it was connected to a hand and a forearm, that the body of a 4 or 5-year-old could produce a big sound just like an adult, actually. So that's what's happening here. There's something else interesting in this passage. The right hand actually has very similar in and out. It's a little bit smaller than the left hand. But this is interesting. In the next one, the right hand starts from the D and goes a little bit forward to the G. At the same time, I'm coming out a little bit and across. So sometimes when people see similar figures, they look similarly, but they're played very differently. My colleague John Bloomfield did a wonderful lecture on this very topic, when things look the same but they feel differently. It's very important to understand that you can't apply the first solution to the second moment. So the second moment has a different solution. Okay, let's move on. There's another question similar to the fifth finger. How do I play Chopin Etude Opus 25, number 1? How to play it relaxed and fluent. The problem is I don't have good support on my fifth finger. So this is very interesting because, once again, it's not a question of the finger being strong, it's a question of how we use our body to make the finger feel supported and therefore strong. What's very interesting in this passage is that it's so, the solution is so different than what I was taught as a child to do. I was taught to do what I would now call shaping. But I was taught to do it in really a very bad way because, first of all, I was taught to do it from my upper arm. So the minute you start initiating motions from the upper arm, these are slow-moving muscles and they tire very quickly in speed. Also, those large motions will pull you off the bottom of the key. So the more you initiate those motions from the upper arm, the less control at the keyboard you're going to have. It's an interesting thing here. We have a whole sort of science of shaping, and the analysis of the shape here is that it's an overshape and another overshape. So we have actually consecutive overshapes. When I learned to do it as a child, I did what I now know to be an overshape on the way down and an undershape on the way up. And I was always criticized for the evenness of the notes in between because my arm was pulling me all over the place and it's very difficult to control those notes. When you have that kind of shaping, then the fifth finger gets the support of the arm. When it's pulling over like this, the fifth finger can be very weak, stretched, and not supported. I'm saying this with the knowledge that, of course, the rotation is functioning, there's a little bit of in and out functioning, and also that the positioning, once again, where we play on the keyboard can make or break a passage. Because I can do exactly the same motions and be outside and it won't feel very good. It's interesting how far in this passage how far in toward the fall board we have to be. Okay. Okay, there's a question from Yanni. This has to do with the Liszt 12th Hungarian Rhapsody. So the question is, in the right hand of this piece, how is it possible to play it fast? I am trying to use single rotations on each note in the right hand, but I am getting tired and I am nowhere near the tempo that I want. So I thought it was a very good question because this brings into play the whole issue of proportion. Because the success of a passage doesn't only matter on the movements we use, but the size of the movements we use. So in this case, I haven't seen the person play this, but my suspicion is that the single rotations are very, very big. So we only need the motion that makes something feel easy and successful. And it's very economical, actually. So it is true, these are all single rotations, but don't forget that you're going from an interval to a single note, alternating constantly. So I think it's always a good idea to check the vertical walking hand and arm. Down, 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 down. Because it's really easy to either not have support on the interval or not have support on the single note. One of the things that's really interesting here is that the positioning is crucial. If I'm even the slightest bit too far out, my fifth finger is very far away from that C sharp. So we're not very used to positioning ourselves in the black key area. But it's important to realize that when the finger, the hand, and the forearm are connected to each other, there isn't the experience of heaviness that you would have if you were trying to overcome the key just with your finger. So just by putting the finger, hand, and forearm together, you have whatever you need to overcome those keys. So I can be more inside, which puts me right across from that C sharp. Now, the other issue there is grouping. We have sometimes very fundamental groupings that then get put in hierarchically into a larger group. So what I'm trying to say is, there's fundamentally groups of 2 here. But as we go faster, we don't have to think each individual group of 2. Actually, the grouping here is in 4. Now, what does grouping mean in this context? Grouping means that there's a sense of starting, that the arm starts and starts again. And this is a grouping actually by direction, because this is going up and it falls back. So there's a slight sense of the grouping by the in and out. There's also the grouping because, like we said, you have a denser sonority and a less dense sonority. So when we add those elements together, you can see that could contribute to why the passage didn't go fast. Because if you're trying to go fast with rotation alone, that's not going to cut it. So it's always what combination of elements solves the passage. So when someone brings a passage, we're looking for their feedback, because we can say, okay, do the rotation, but they have to feel that something makes it better. One of the elements that can get lost very easily is the single rotation back from the 5. Just feeling like it falls back. That helps tremendously in this passage. There was a question from Simone. I would like to ask about the thirds trill from the Chopin Etude, Opus 25, number 6. How can I feel the rotation in high speed, and how much my fingers should move? How can I be sure about feeling balanced on both fingers? What can cause the wrist to be very high in speed? So this, I thought it was very interesting, because when we talk about this particular set of thirds, they're in kind of a trill form. You know, the sound is like a trill. It's very easy actually to get the rotation wrong here. If we can give you a principle, which is intervals, we can never rotate the arm to the 5th side of our hand to play an interval, because it throws us off balance. We're always coming toward the thumb, but we play straight down. So we're not rotating and playing as a continuation of the rotation. We're coming to that interval and it's finished. So how the rotation works here is it's then another double to the next interval. It's not left, right, because if I did it that way, I would be thrown off balance on the top note. So it's left, 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 left. Now, one might ask, how in the world do you play using all those motions and play fast? Well, the point is that it becomes an organization and a response in the arm that leaves you with a feeling of being balanced. It's like we don't feel very much what goes on in between, because the message becomes the experience of playing the keys, and we're not conscious of doing those preparatory motions. But if we don't do them, then we will be off balance. And you hear a lot of those kinds of things in double notes. So when it's in speed, all I can tell you is that the fingers do have a role. We don't play, the whole body of knowledge is not based on just arm rotation. It's how the arm rotation integrates with the hand, with the fingers. There are finger motions. The fingers are alive. That's the best description I can give for fingers, because of all the bad associations we have with fingers. We have a lot of experiences of our fingers working, or our fingers forcing, or digging, grabbing, all those things. When the technique is right, when the things that are happening behind those fingers are correct, the fingers feel actually very light and easy. So I hope hope that answers a little bit of what goes on in double notes. I would say the biggest factor is not to fall over. Interesting example in Debussy. This is from Rodney, and he writes, I've been trying different fingerings, the more compact fingerings, which I think he means crossing over a lot, seem to work, no, actually the opposite. The more compact fingers seem to work better than the wider ones, but can feel bumpy going from the thumb on a black key to non-thumb on a white key. Is there a general principle from working out these types of figures? I'm not sure I'm going to answer it directly, but I found the example to be very important. Why is it important? You can choose a fingering that crosses over a lot, but I think this, in the tempo that it goes, is one of the things that doesn't work so well. What is amazing is that when we work out a technique and we teach a scale, we teach people how to cross over the thumb and how to cross under the thumb. We do have that skill, and that helps us a lot in places because actually we can cross over the thumb well and fast and easy. But here, I don't think all of those crossings work. So the fingering that I would use, and I can certainly post this fingering for you after the session, 5-2-1, 5-3-2-1. Now, what does that mean? That means that the moment from the thumb to the 5 cannot be connected. So there's no way to physically connect that 1 to the 5. But we can't make it sound like a clipped note, and we can't make it sound like an accented note. We have to have it be part of the musical texture. So here's where the physical shaping really helps us, because we're going a 3-note over shape here, and the arm is continuing in between the notes and part of the disconnection, so that it feels very smooth. So let me show again. This is a 3-note over shape. The last note of one shape becomes the first note of another shape. It's now going into a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 note over shape. Why we use numbers is so we know where high points are. So odd number in a shape, the high point's in the middle number. Now going back, the 5 is on the way down very, very little to the thumb. If it goes too far down, there'll be nowhere to go. If it continues up, this will feel like a falling out. So it's on the way down, it's very fluid. And then a 3-note undershape. And with a little bit of pedaling and a little bit of tonal control, realize when the fingerhand and arm are unified, you have a much better chance of controlling the vertical moments, which is what sound is dependent upon. So those motions are giving me the ability to control that E and match it to the following A. Very good question from Aldo. My left hand has very big leaps in the Mephisto. Not clear to me how the body should move when the leaps are so big. And I think he felt insecure and felt like he could miss. So this was interesting. The body adjusts to whatever is needed in the passage. And in this particular passage you have, in a way, two things. You have the octave, which is in this register, and you have the next moment, which is in this register. So what will not work here is, first of all, staying just in one place. You can rule that out. What also will not work is going to the extreme range over here and back, and then going back and back. So that kind of thing doesn't work so well. What it is there's a slight give in the body. When I play this, I'm not completely over there, and I'm not completely over there. There's a slight movement of the torso to the right, and now the torso moves slightly back to the left, and then once again, I'm moving to the left, back to the right. So I wanted to point out a few other things. So that's the role of the torso, to feel exactly how it moves left and right. The other thing is the closest note, what we call the closest note. That means if we relate, for instance, the thumb of that first octave to the D, we now have this distance that we're dealing with. We're rolling over the thumb, and that's giving us the closest note. That's far closer than thinking all the way up to the B sharp. Now, I want to say another thing about leaping. If you leap and you go in the air, you can be sure that that will feel a lot less secure. Feel that when you play the bottom E, that you go to the surface immediately, just across the keyboard to the surface. And particularly back down. If it goes up in an arc like this, it'll feel a lot less secure. So, going up, I have this as the closest note. And going down. Now, this is very interesting. From here to the bottom, it shares a note. So I can rotate over the 5 and place myself on that bottom octave. Once I do that, I have a little bit of time to group, to start again. So it... And I think when the motions have gotten you there quickly, and you group and you start there, then you have the security. So I see that we're out of time. We have a few more examples. If you would like this type of session again, please write us. It's been a pleasure to be with you this evening. I wish you all well, I wish you all safety, and I wish you all good health. Thank you very much.